Greetings and welcome to Unit 8, Elections and Campaigns in Texas. In this lecture, we're going to discuss the differences between primary, general, runoff, and special elections. Compare and contrast open and closed primary systems. Factors in deciding to run as a candidate. And identify some campaign strategies. We have a lot of ground to cover, so without further delay, let's just dive right into this. Okay, so the types of elections. So the first election that we need, the first type of election that we need to become familiar with is the primary. This is the first election in an election cycle. In Texas, primary elections are held on the second Tuesday in March of even-numbered years. So what is a primary exactly, right? Other than the first election in an election cycle. The primary is the mechanism, the method for which we use to pick who our nominee is going to be for the party. Now, one of the things I like to do to help us understand and to differentiate these to understand the primary and to differentiate it between the general election is to use an analogy with football. I'm not much of a sports fan, but for those who are, this might sound familiar to you. Like the Super Bowl, like we have with football here in the United States, right? We have two conferences, and if I remember right, it's the NFC and the AFC, right? The AFC stands for the American Football Conference, and the NFC, the National Football Conference, if I remember correctly. Anywho, they have what's known as a playoff, right? To select which team in its conference is the best to represent that conference in the Super Bowl. Well, that's what the primary is. The primary is the playoff. And the general election is the Super Bowl. So that's what we're looking at here, right? This is the primary is the most common method or mechanism used for picking a party nominee for a state, local, or even presidential elections. Sometimes we refer to elections as contests, and that's what it is. It's a contest, right? So that's a primary. It's used to narrow the field of candidates for a given elective office. So a primary allows us to have a lot of people apply to be a candidate for this specific elective office, and we get to narrow that down to one. So we might have, 5 or 15 or 21 people that want to be president, for example, or be the governor, or county clerk, or the county judge, or county commissioners. This principle holds true across the board. It's our mechanism for narrowing all these candidates for this specific seat down to one, to represent that political party in the upcoming general election. More in the general election in just a moment. Right. So, a majority vote is required. If no candidate receives an absolute majority, that is 50% plus one, then there is a runoff primary between the two candidates receiving the most votes, which is an excellent segue into our next election type, which is the runoff election. Right, so any candidate, when we have a primary and no one receives 50% plus one, then we have what's known as the runoff election. This is an election between the two who receive the most votes, right, in that primary election. Right? So primary elections often have multiple candidates. This is not unheard of, right? This is quite common. Participating to represent a party in the general election. And it's not uncommon. that a single candidate fails to receive 50% plus one. So we do have these runoff elections relatively frequently, right? I digress. But that's what a runoff is. When we have a primary election, no one gets 50% plus one. The two candidates who receive the most votes goes into a special, goes into this runoff election. In this runoff election, whoever receives the most votes wins. That's what we're looking at. So now let's dive into the general election. So the primary election is used, it's the method to picking out one candidate to represent the political party in that very specific elected office seat. Once we've selected that candidate to represent the parties, now we have what's known as the general election. Or, to go back to that analogy, this is the Super Bowl. Right? We have the playoffs, they've selected their favorite teams, and that favorite team in both conferences, and now we head to the Super Bowl. And that's what we got here. Right? It's an election that voters cast ballots to select public officials. Public officials at any level, by the way. This is including municipalities, this is including counties, congressional districts, state Senate districts, state House districts, and even president, right? So this is the general election. So after choosing the nominee through the primary, they go to this general election, and here we have a determined final winner. In elections, we have winners and losers. We have to. We can't have 50 presidents run, right? Or running the country. That would be chaotic. We can't have 3 governors running the state of Texas. That doesn't make much sense, right? So the general election is used to determine the winner and the loser. Just like we see in football, right? Just like we see in the Super Bowl. There is a clear winner and a clear loser. And that's what we have in elections. And I want to take a moment here real quick to talk about winners and losers. I mentioned multiple times that I have campaign experience, right? That I served 7 years for a political party here in the great state of Texas. And I can tell you that not every campaign that I was a part of, my candidate won. I can tell you that I know what electoral defeat looks like, and I can tell you that it sucks. It stinks. I mean, losing is never a good thing, whether we're talking about a video game, whether we're talking about a chess game, or whether we're talking about some kind of contest. Losing sucks. It does, and I know this firsthand. And not every candidate that I volunteered for won. And it sucks. It truly does. But that should never get in the way, right, of the respect for that specific office. So I just want to take again another moment here. What I'm about to say applies to both Democrats and Republicans. I have friends on both sides, and I see both sides doing this. All right? And I just want to point this out real quick. We see this a lot specifically during presidential election years, and I want to talk about this idea of not my president. I'm talking about the president here, but this applies to state politics as well. Bear with me, I'll get to my point. Just give me 1 second here. So the idea, not my president, right? The idea is to say that, I disagree with this person, but that's not what is actually being said. You're saying not my president. Well, I'm sorry, I don't know how to tell you this, but yeah, they are. Right? Whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whoever wins that particular office, that's your representative. Now, you may disagree with them, which is fine. Excellent if you do. You may not like them at all, and that's great. That's fine as well. But don't let that electoral defeat sour your respect for the office. Whether it's a president, whether it's a congressional member, or whether it's your governor, lieutenant governor, or a member of the Texas legislature. Yes, there are losers and winners. Yes. But just because you lose or your candidate lost does not entitle us to be disrespectful to that specific position. Like I said, we can disagree all day long, right? In fact, you can contact your legislators, you can contact the governor, you can contact the president and let them know your frustration. Let them know what you think about them, and that's fine. But don't let that defeat morph into something more than, oh man, that sucks, right? Because it does. It sucks to have your candidate lose, right? So I just want to say that for a moment because I think it's worth saying, and I think both political parties, both sides, whether we're Democrat or Republican, need to hear that. Because they are our president. Now, we may not have voted for them. They may not represent our views. And that's fine. But they do represent us. And they were duly elected by the majority. So we need to understand that. Realize that. Yep, have a cold glass of root beer or have a piece of tres leches cake and go, you know what, man, it sucks, but, life goes on. And it does. Win the next election, right? That's the key. Don't let defeat morph into, not my president. Instead, let that morph into what can I do better? What can we do better? What can my candidate do better for the next time? And do better next time. And so maybe your candidate won't be the loser the next time. I digress. Let's move on, okay? Let's move on. So since 1845, Election Day is set the Tuesday next after the first Monday in the month of November, or the first Tuesday after November 1st in even-numbered years. So that's when we have the general election. Okay? We see the primaries held in March, and we see the general election months later in November. All right, let's carry on. So, special elections, right? We talked about the primary, we talked about the runoff, we've talked about the general election, right? Now let's talk about these special elections. They're used for constitutional amendments, right? So, remember back, right? To amend the Texas Constitution, the Texas legislature proposes an amendment, and then that proposal gets put on a ballot for you and I to vote on. And we get to vote on that, right? So these sometimes we can have special elections for these constitutional amendments if the amendments don't line up, or the passage of the amendments or the passage of the proposals don't line up with elections, like in March and in November, we see these special elections, right? And they can also be used to fill vacancies. And most vacancy cases, special elections occur after the incumbent suddenly passes away or resigns or potentially impeached. Right? There's a host of reasons why we may have a vacancy in an elected office. Right? They could pass away, they could resign, they could be impeached. These are all legitimate reasons. Yeah, we can have a special election to fill that vacancy. Note, though, that special elections are called by the Texas legislature. It's a characteristic here. So let's move on to the different types of primary elections that we have in the United States as a whole. Okay, so we have first up, and there's four that we need to know about. There's four. So let's talk about the first one here. We have the closed primary system. Right? People may vote in a party's primary only if they are registered members of that party prior to election day. Okay? So in other words, you have to belong to that political party before you can vote in their primary. Okay? So some examples that we see this in states, we have Delaware, Florida, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, District of Columbia, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, and Wyoming. These are examples of states that have this closed primary system. Let's talk now about semi-closed primary system. And this is where we have unaffiliated voters, that is, those voters who have not declared party affiliation, that is to say that they're independents or moderates, as sometimes they're referred to as. And registered party members can vote in the party's primary. Right? So unaffiliated and registered party members can both vote in the respective party primary. Some examples of states that have this semi-closed primary system: Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Ohio, Kansas, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North Carolina, Oregon, Rhode Island, Utah, and West Virginia. Now let's talk about the open primary system. This is where any registered voter can participate in the primary election, regardless of party affiliation. Okay? Some examples of this: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Hawaii, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. States with semi-open primary system, and you probably caught on to the pattern here, but this is where a registered voter need not publicly declare which party's primary they will vote in before casting a ballot, but they must request a party's specific ballot. Some examples of states that have this type: Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and Iowa. So this system may sound familiar to us because Texas is kind of a mixture. We'll talk about Texas specifically here in a moment. But these are the four types. We have the open, semi-open, closed, and semi-closed. Okay? So let's talk about the caucus, because this is a defining type of choosing who's going to represent the party in a primary, to use the word primary. Okay, this is in a caucus, which we don't have this in Texas. We don't use the caucus system for our primaries, but some states do. This is where we have a meeting of party members. So that is to say, Republicans, members of the Republican Party or members of the Democrat Party. They get together in a convention style and they nominate informally who's going to represent the party in the general election. That's a caucus. Okay. Some states use this. Nevada and North Dakota, they use this system. It's less expensive as compared to buying the election equipment, maintaining that election equipment, training people to use that election equipment. It's less expensive, more transparent, and some would argue it's more interesting. But voter turnout is low. So which one's more interesting? The fact that it's more interesting or that voter turnout's not increased? Nah, I digress. We have a lot more ground to cover, so let's continue on. So Texas primaries. Now to actually talk about what we are. It's difficult to classify, to be honest with you. Texas were between open and semi-open. For example, voters may choose to vote in either party's primary, but not both. And voting in a runoff election. Voters who cast ballots in one of the major party primary elections may only vote in a runoff election for the same party in which they cast the original primary vote in. Voters who did not cast a ballot in a primary election are free to choose either party's runoff, but may only vote in one party's runoff primary election. So you see how we are a bit of a mixture. This is a bit of a mixed bag. And after all, Texas, we are special, are we not? We have a unique history. I never heard of a Massachusetts edition of a truck or a Florida edition of a truck, right? I'm picking on the other states, but you get my point. You get my point. So yeah, it makes sense that with our part-time legislature, with the fact that our legislature only meets once every 2 years, that we have some that were different in this regard, and that we are a mixture. All right, so let's talk now about deciding to run to be a candidate. And I hope you actually do consider running for office. And if you do, these are some considerations that, like other candidates, you're going to have to reconcile or answer or think about, right? Who's your competitor? And it's very simple. Who are you running against, right? Are they well-known, popular? Is it going to be an easy target, if you will, to win against? Or are they very well liked and they have a strong following that it's going to be nearly impossible? So who are you running against? This is a serious question that you're going that people who decide to run for office. Again, I encourage you to run if you ever get that inkling to do so. Do. But this is one of those considerations. Another is family obligations. Simply put, are you in a position in your family life to be able to do that? That's a question. Would your family support that type of decision, right? And of course, financial backing. To be clear, right? Campaigns are expensive, very expensive. It was estimated a couple of years ago, this was without inflation, by the way, to be a serious contender, not guarantee win, but to be a contender, you had to have at least $1 million in campaign funds to be a contender for the U.S. House of Representatives. So if that's true, right, we don't have that in our bank accounts. Most candidates, if not the overwhelming majority, do not have that in their bank account. So financial backing comes from campaign donations, fundraisers. Yep, fundraisers. And donations from others who support the cause, who support your cause, who supports your positions, who are invested in your positions. Pun very much intended there. Right? So these are some of the considerations. Others include spouse. Yes, you have to think about your spouse when you decide to run for office, right? Is that something they support? Is that something that that they may be asked questions, or they may be asked for an interview? Is that something they want to engage in? Do they support this campaign, right? Children, of course. Do you have children? What ages are they? Are they independent enough on their own where you can be gone for hours upon hours upon hours every day campaigning and representing if you win? Right? Your work history, the position that you're trying to run for, does it match your previous experience enough to be able to convince voters to vote for you? Your health, and this ranges from something simple like sciatica all the way up to age and potential life-threatening diseases or conditions you may have. Are you healthy enough for a campaign run, right? To be out there in the sun canvassing an area, to walk miles upon miles upon miles, to be a part of parades and all these other various activities that happen during campaigns. And of course, your financial history. Right? But like I said, most candidates do not have the type of money that's required in their bank account, in their personal bank account, to run these campaigns. You have to have that financial backing, those campaign donations. Right? Well, for women specifically, family obligations account for the choice to run or not. Uh, Political science research has shown that family obligations is potentially the number one reason why women choose to run for office or not. What's interesting to note here is another characteristic consideration is the feeling of being judged. Well, women specifically, research has shown, are sensitive to that judgment, and they don't want to be judged in that way. So that's interesting to note. Women are also more likely than men to wait until their children are old enough or who are older for them to run. So that's to say that women are more likely to wait for their children to get old enough before choosing to run versus men who would just go ahead and run, regardless of what the age of the children are. So these are some interesting characteristics, but we're not quite done yet, right? Lower office often leads to higher office, which is time consuming. Yes, time consuming. And this ranges, right? If you want to be governor, it's nearly impossible to just announce yourself as, I'm running for governor, and then you're going to win. You kind of need to build up to it, right? Previous governors, that's what they've done. For example, Greg Abbott, right? He served as the Texas Attorney General first before becoming governor. So it is time consuming, right? Because one term in office, depending upon the office, is most likely 4 years, right? So it's time consuming, but you build up that experience. You build up running those campaigns. You are more confident, not only in yourself and your skills, but you're confident in the process, if this makes sense, right? But it is time consuming. It takes time. Depending upon what position you're aiming for. If you're aiming for like local level position, no, maybe not. But if you're aiming for like a statewide office or a congressional seat, then it can take some time. It can. Yeah. And maybe that's not time that we are willing to give it. Anyways, let's move on. So, other factors here. Primary versus general campaigns. They have differing goals. And I'm being serious. Let's think about this one for a second. But the primary, right? The primary is the mechanism we use to choose one candidate out of many to represent the party. So that candidate in the primary election, the number one goal is to appeal to the base, appeal to party volunteers, appeal to the party in the electorate, party in the organization, right? Those who are active volunteers, the base. They have to give them a reason to vote for them, right? You see where I'm going with this? So they're going to tote the party line. They're going to be Mr. or Mrs. Republican, Mr. or Mrs. Democrat, right? You see where I'm going with this? They're going to embrace, lifetime Republican or lifetime Democrat, right? But when it comes to the general election, assuming they survive the primary, the tone has to change. Why? Because now they're not simply seeking the approval of the base. Now they're seeking the approval of the majority. Now they're seeking the approval of moderates as well. So the tone shifts. The messaging shifts just a little bit. Just enough to be appealing, to be attractive to moderates. And those on the other side who are maybe on the fence about which candidate to support. Right? So there are differing goals here. One is more of a pander to the base, while the other one tries to be as moderate as possible to win that election. Now, this is true unless we have gerrymandered districts. This is where it gets different, because in a gerrymandered in a gerrymandered district, it doesn't matter Democrat, Republican, moderate, or not. That district is guaranteed. If it was, if a Republican redistricted in such a way, only a Republican will win. So it does not matter what is by your name, other than an R or a D. That's it. Not your positioning, not what you stand for, not what your messaging is. Only simply is there an R or a D. Now this is assuming you're after the primary, right? This is in the general election. In the primary, what's going to matter the most is toting the party line. Do you know the party platform? Do you support the party platform? How are you going to support the party platform? Have you supported it in the past? Are you familiar with controversies within the political party? What's going to matter is how well in tuned with the base, and only the base. Because it doesn't matter in the general election, you're going to win if you win the primary, which leads to increasing in partisanship, which increases political polarization. And gerrymandering is not a good practice. I mean, it guarantees you're going to win if you belong to that particular political party, but it's not a very healthy democratic practice. And when I say Democrat, I do mean lowercase d, democratic as in democratic principles, as in free and open, fair elections, that type of thing. Anyways, I'm digressing. The significance and name recognition to voters. This cannot be understated. Okay. Significance of name recognition is extremely important. How popular are you? Are you well known? This is important. How much name recognition do you have? And this is built up over time. You don't all of a sudden just have it. It's built over time, right? It is. Truly it is. So don't think, oh man, I don't have any, so I shouldn't run. Don't think like that, right? Don't let that get to you. But name recognition is important to voters. So you might be asking yourself, why do I have a background image here of Spider-Man? Well, I heard once that everyone knows who Spider-Man is. They may not be able to tell the backstory. They may not know everything there is to know about this character. But everyone knows this character, right? Everyone's at least heard of this character. And that's the point here of name recognition, right? You may not know anything about them, but if you heard someone say the name, you have some concept, right, of them. And this helps with motivating voters to vote, right? The importance of media attention for visibility. Just like name recognition, media attention on you or on a candidate is extremely vital. It helps with name recognition, and it builds up momentum for your campaign. Now, we're going to talk about the media much more in detail when we get to the chapter on the media. But for right now, or the unit on the media, but for right now, what I want you to know is, since the media does have agenda setting powers, that is to say that the media sets the topics of discussion that we are going to have with our friends, our family, our co-workers, our colleagues, our classmates, etc. They set the agenda, they set the topics, they give us the topics that we're going to talk about. And we'll talk more in detail about this when we get to the media chapter. But because of that agenda setting power for which they have, it's vital. If you have visibility by the media, you are reaching out to more voters, which will help build you more momentum for your campaign. So you gotta grab the attention of the media. Now, some like to do this with, this can be done in multiple ways. Some have said there's no such thing as bad press. Then there are those who would argue that no, you do not want to be associated with bad press. That is to say, bad stories that are negative. You don't want to be associated with that. Let me know which one. Let me know how you think about that. Right? Let me know how you think. Is all press good, regardless if it's good or bad, or do you just want the positive? Do voters, as a voter, do you care? And if so, let me know. I digress. Let's move on. So campaigns, to be honest with you, they haven't changed much over time. They just haven't. They are expensive, right? I just mentioned a moment ago about how $1 million to be a contender. It's not a guaranteed win. It's not that, if I fundraise $1 million, I will win this. No, you're just going to be a serious contender, right? Still need messaging and all that stuff. But they are expensive, and this has not changed much over time. They can be nasty. Campaigns, they can be nasty. The fact that our campaigns in recent times have been dirty, been nasty, this is not new to American politics. Throughout U.S. political history, we have seen a host of elections where it was nasty. It was each other dragging, each opponent dragging each other through the mud, right? So this is not new to our political discourse. It's not. And this is nothing new. That's not to excuse it, though. And if you don't mind, I'm going to get on my soapbox again just for one quick moment. Bear with me here. I want to talk about branding the other side as the enemy. Okay? Democrats and Republicans. I don't care where we stand. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. It does not matter. We cannot brand each other as enemies. We can't. That's detrimental to everyone. Democrats are trying to do what they believe is best for the nation. Republicans are doing what they believe is best for the nation. They are both trying to achieve what they believe is best for you and I. Now, you and I may disagree on that. You and I may disagree of the Republicans' path. You and I may disagree with the Democrats' path. That's absolutely true. We may. But don't let that morph into enemies. Here's what I mean. In chess, I love to play chess, right? It's a fantastic, beautiful game. In chess, if I'm playing you are my opponent. You are there to push against my strategies, and I am there to push against your strategies. I am there to put you in checkmate. You are there to put me in checkmate. I am there to prevent you from putting me into checkmate, and you are there to prevent me to putting you in checkmate. We are opponents, but never are you an enemy. And there is a difference, right? An enemy is someone you kill. An enemy is someone that if I do not kill them, my life is at stake. An enemy is someone to eradicate. An enemy is someone to annihilate. Right? There's a difference here. Political opponents, political parties should never be branded as the enemy. They both are trying to do what's best, what they believe is best for us. Now, it's up to you and I to choose which one we believe is best for us. And we may disagree on that. I hope we do. But don't let that disagreement, and both political parties need to hear this, from the leaders all the way down to the grassroots. They need to be told this. Stop branding the other side as the enemy. Because we're not. You're not. I'm not. An enemy is someone that you hunt. An enemy is someone you seek out and destroy. Case in point, World War II. Japan declared war on us. We were at war. They were our enemy. Nazi Germany declared war on us as well. They wanted to conquer the world. They were our enemy. And what do we do with enemies? Seek out and destroy. Seek out and kill. Opponents are not our enemy. And we need to recognize that. All right, I'm off my soapbox. Let's move on. Right. So technology is used to appeal to as many voters as possible, right? So this is not new. This is not new. Campaigns have been using technology that's available to them since campaigning in the United States, right? Since the founding. Case in point, the printing press was used to create flyers and pamphlets and manifestos of political parties and of candidates to pass out to the masses to rally up momentum for their campaign. Campaigns have used the radio waves to reach more houses, to reach more of the public, to convince them to vote for them to build more momentum. Use the television to run campaign ads and to give messages to hopefully generate momentum for their campaign. And use the internet, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, MySpace, if that's still a thing. Facebook, all these platforms are platforms for candidates to use to get their message out. So not much has changed through the course of U.S. history. Our technology has, but the usage of that technology hasn't. Right? I digress. Let's move on. So inside the debate, right? This is more like a scripted program, debates are, than an actual interview. So it's almost like a concert, if you will, right? It's more of a scripted performance rather than an interview. Okay. Candidates need to have a clear message that is attractive to voters, right? So, how that message is crafted, right, and what message you do craft, that's up to each individual candidate, right? Some use fear, some use hope. Some use, let's take a look at the last 2 or 4 years or 6 years, and are we better off today than we were then? Some of us, some messaging focuses on economics, etc., etc. How you craft your message. I know some campaigns, they used humor. They used humor as a way to attract voters. And I thought that was fascinating. Humor is actually a nice vehicle, right? Because you can't brand the other side while you're laughing. And you can't brand the other side as the enemy while you're laughing, while you're having a good laugh. Especially at the candidate's own expense. But anyways, I digress. But craft that message. It has to be clear, it has to be concise, and it needs to be attractive to voters. So understanding public opinion will help you craft a message that's attractive. And lastly, candidates should be humorous, witty, and comfortable with the situation that they find themselves in. Right? Humor is an excellent way to diffuse a situation, to reflect a highly critical question, using wit to be, campaigns are very much like boxing, right? Or karate. You gotta be light on your feet, right? Be able to adapt, being able to bob and weave in and out of critical questions or highly pointed questions, etc. Right? Using that wit to be able to navigate what can potentially be a very hostile environment, right? And be comfortable. Be comfortable with running. Be comfortable with your decision. Be comfortable with the nature of what you're looking at, the nature of politics, right? Be comfortable with public speaking. Be comfortable with answering questions and being interviewed and all these things. I digress. So this actually concludes the lecture. So as always, if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, or something didn't make sense, please feel free to reach out to me and contact me, and I'll be more than willing to help you out. With that said, until we see you next time, peace.